I was just about to record a video about the finalization of the NAR settlement and the DOJ and what that looks like going forward, and the incessant emails, alerts, notifications from industry newsletters about that topic. And then I got this, an email from the California Department of Real Estate. I got this just now. And even if you're not in California, I think this does pertain to you. I think it pertains to all real estate licensees because I think this is going to happen in other states. Now, keep in mind that the realtor settlement, the policy changes, applies to realtors only. If you're an independent real estate agent, you're not subject to the terms of the NAR settlement. That applies to realtors. Now, this created an advantage for independent real estate agents. For example, if you are an independent real estate agent, a non-realtor, you don't have to have a buyer representation agreement in place, with exception. For example, in California, the Association of Realtors, of course, couldn't let independent agents have that advantage. So they lobbied a state lawmaker to create a bill requiring all real estate licensees to have a buyer representation agreement in place. So if NAR is going into the mud with this settlement, they're going to drag down the independent agents with them. Now, that's old news. That's been signed into law. It's done. I've done videos on it. And then after that, there was an outcry because the California Department of Real Estate sent out an alert, okay? And that's what we're looking at here. We just got an amended alert. And that alert said that there's a circumstance, a scenario in which the buyer can cut their agent out if they're unable to pay the compensation owed to their agent that's outlined in the representation agreement, okay? So the buyer, and let's face it, the buyer is, they're having the seller pick up the tab, right? So the buyer's doing a representation agreement and they're putting in the commission amount, but they're intending for the seller to pick up their tab. Now, if the seller can't, it's basically creating a scenario in which the buyer can walk away and say, hey, agent, I know you've been working for me at no cost. I mean, it's not like buyers are paying a retainer, right? An agent's working for free on spec in hopes of a commission at closing. And so the buyer can say, I realize that commission, the fee for services rendered, well, that's kind of getting in the way of me purchasing this home I love. So I'm sorry, but I'm going to cut you out. And that buyer can just choose to work directly with the seller or with the listing agent in the capacity of the listing agent being a dual agent. So either way, it cuts the buyer's agent out just based on the buyer's inability to pay. Now, this can largely be fixed in how the buyer's agent fills out the representation agreement. And I'll be doing a video in 1 week because it says around December 16th, that's when the new buyer representation agreement is coming out. And I'm going to do a tutorial and I'm going to show you how to write it up so you don't get cut out. But anyway, once the DRE told agents this, there was an outcry, okay? Now they're sending an amended version, okay? And that's what this email is I just got just now. And it says here, there's a little blurb up top. Please find below an amended version of the advisory addressing the new compensation and representation rules in which the department sent out originally back in November. That's what caused everyone to go into a frenzy. And this amended version clarifies language that caused the confusion over the buyer's ability to walk away and from their financial obligation under the signed buyer representation agreement when financially strapped. I'm not sure if that's really a technical or official term, but we'll take a look at what happens when your buyer is financially strapped, okay? So we go down through this advisory. Okay, coming January 2025, okay? Now, this is where it addresses the Assembly Bill 2992, which effectively reflects the NAR settlement. I mean, let's be clear, the Association of Realtors, they're lobbyists along with Zillow. I mean, they drafted all this. I mean, so of course it's going to mirror the NAR settlement terms. It's effectively the same thing. Now, they make a distinction as soon as practicable, right? Because with the NAR settlement terms, with the new policy for realtors, you have to have a representation agreement in place prior to your first showing, okay? Well, in California, it just says as soon as practicable, okay? Well, what does that mean? Now, I've had agents, especially independent, meaning non-realtor agents, and they've pushed back on this, and they've debated this point with me in comments on YouTube videos and such. And they've said, as soon as practicable, I mean, that can be when I write an offer. Well, that's silly. You should not do that. I mean, there's no loose interpretation. It's basically saying as soon as within reason. Now, if you're out doing showings, how can you say it's not practicable to have your representation agreement filled out, okay? Because you can get in trouble, and here's why. Delaying the practicable, having a loose interpretation of that will always work against you as an agent. And the reason is that if you get drawn into some legal environment, some official environment, you're in arbitration or you're being cross-examined or something, they're going to ask you why it wasn't practicable for you to get your representation agreement signed when you were out at your first showing. Why? If you're doing a showing or if you're meeting a client in person for an hour or two, why was it not practicable to get the representation agreement signed? Okay, that looks bad. It looks like you're delaying it intentionally. Why? And they're going to assume for nefarious purposes. But there's an even greater reason. Now that we're all required, all licensees are required to have a representation agreement in place, okay? That representation agreement filled out properly is the only thing saving you from being cut out of a real estate transaction. Because it's open to interpretation when a buyer can say that they are financially strapped and can cut you out. So you need that protection. So why on earth would you delay it, okay? So they and it's funny, they make this note, timing of this legal requirement is different from the trade association practice. I mean, barely. It's practically the same thing. I mean, yeah, we get it. This is state law, and the other one is a trade association. But we know who drafted it. It's the same thing, all right? Okay, now we come down here, and we get to this part. Okay, this is the important part, right? And I read this a couple times before making this video, and I thought, okay, so they do an amendment. What fears are they alleviating here? Because it basically just restates the same thing, like agents were too dumb the first time around to understand the implication of being cut out of a deal. Like maybe if they restate it in more words, we won't freak out about being cut out of and working for free. Okay, so let me read the important part, okay? If the out-of-pocket costs to pay their agent remain too great, okay, that's up for interpretation, that's subjective, and the seller and buyer have not yet reached an agreement on the sales price, the buyer may walk away. Again, you gotta love this official language. Your financially strapped buyer may walk away. Why can't they just use terms like, in cases of insufficient funds or even inability to pay? Financially strapped, walk away? You mean cancel their agent, right? You mean terminate their agency relationship, right? Okay, buyer may walk away from the subject property and work with their agent to purchase another property, presumably with another seller that'll pick up the tab for your buyer that wants someone to work for them for free. The buyer may also proceed with the purchase of the subject. So they say that first, like, hey, if your buyer can't afford the property you made an offer on and the buyer and seller aren't in contract, well, they can go to a different property. Yeah, we know that. They're just telling us this up here, like, don't worry, all hope's not lost. This whole thing is so silly. The buyer may also now, and this is where they get to the actual issue with the subject property, okay? Because obviously the buyer can go to another property. The buyer may also proceed with the purchase of the subject property without representation or approach the seller's agent about possible dual agency. Okay, so they can work with the seller directly, or they can work with the listing agent and have the listing agent be a dual agent. Okay, now you get cut out. That's it. They're telling you right now, hey guys, the buyer can cut you out. There it is. Okay, they're alerting you. And people are like, well, this isn't law. This is, the DRE is telling you how this works. Okay, these state agencies, they also advise consumers. This isn't just some made up opinion. They're telling you of outcomes and code. Okay, this is a warning. So pay attention to it. Okay, and then it says, now here's the important part. Okay, provided, meaning subject to the buyer representation agreement, permitting the buyer to do either of these activities without being financially obligated to pay their agent. Okay, that's your saving grace, okay? If your buyer representation agreement doesn't allow for this nonsense, this absurdity, this insanity, then you'll be protected. Now, in other words, they'll say it again, the buyer will remain financially responsible for compensating their agent unless the signed buyer representation agreement contains an exit clause or the buyer's broker relieves the buyer of their obligation to pay, okay? Actually, It's good that they restate it here because I think it's worded better in this second explanation. So I don't see how this amendment is going to alleviate any more concerns, but I will say that it's good they're restating it because it's a warning. It's a warning to all licensees on how they can get cut out. And honestly, the new buyer representation agreement has an absolutely shameful provision in it, which I will show you in my tutorial when it's officially released, that allows for this to take place. If the trade association, which co-sponsored this bill, gave us a better representation agreement, this would never happen. But since there's a potential in the representation agreement for agents to get cut out with this quote unquote exit clause right here, I will show you how to fill that representation agreement out so it doesn't happen. So that's the amended advisory. Not sure if it alleviates any concerns, but it does warn us what can happen and how our buyer can walk away if they are financially strapped. Thanks for watching.